Hello, my name is Gary Simmons. I'm building a Zenith 750 and I'm installing the Viking 130 engine. And I'm, at Jan's request, going to be recording some aspects of my cowling installation process, based in part in some what could be described as install errors or assumptions that I have made. But I believe that the value of being able to look at some of the challenges that I've experienced in my installation process, as well as some of the little helpful tips that I will provide in the course of things, will be of benefit. So I have my the bottom part of my cowling already installed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take it apart and I'm going to remove some of the work that I've done and be able to explain in more detail some of the challenges that I've had that I think will be informative to your specific building process. While I have the plane as it is right now, I want to just highlight a couple important considerations. But what I discovered is that it was important for me to try to fit the cowling first before I remove that 1 inch. And so I'll say that right now in the very beginning. Before you get started, do not do any trimming of the bottom cowling until you've had it fit, and until it fits and you have some sense of how it's going to unfold before you do any kind of trimming, and I'll explain that in more detail. If you have one of the newer Viking 130 engines, you probably have the new type of exhaust system that is pictured here on my motor. And what I'm going to recommend with respect to installing the cowling is to remove the exhaust system. Just go ahead and if you've already installed it, just go ahead and remove it by taking off the 4 bolts. And just to notice, because you're going to have to be drilling a hole in the cowling, the bottom of the cowling, this particular exhaust system has just about a perpendicular or a straight downward spout. So as I measure this particular angle, it's just about 90 degrees, and it's just almost identical to the prop hub. So for all intents and purposes, if you can just picture a line from the vertical line from the exhaust tube all the way up to approximately right about here, if we were to remove this, we could take a plumb and drop a line down, and we'll find a mark that we can mark on the inside of the cowling. And then afterwards, we can get a piece of scrap and begin to identify a mark on the engine and its distance from the bottom of the engine to the center of the pipe. And for me, that's about 7.5 inches, and I've cut this piece of scrap. So later on, when I got the cowling together and after it's all fitted, before drilling this hole, just wait till you're done. Don't try to drill it early, because the adjustment will have this hole kind of change places for you. So just wait until you get the cowling all the way finished, and then we'll go ahead and find that center, and then you'll go ahead and drill it out. I drill it out to about 2 3/8 inch, and then this may or may not have to be widened. Anyway, we'll have more to say about that, but just some tips before you get started. Go ahead and remove the exhaust system if you haven't already. In addition, I wanted to show that I'm also doing a little patchwork, and Jan has mentioned that patchwork may be necessary, especially when you consider having to remove some of the cowling to make allowances for such as the gearbox or some of the motor mount material. So as you can see in my cowling, I've already cut out some holes, but I will be doing some patchwork later. But for right now, I've removed the cowling and I'm doing some repair work where the hinges were established. I've got a piece of painter's tape backing up all the holes, and I mixed some fiberglass resin and hardener with some cut up cloth material to fill in the holes, and then I put a piece of cloth on top. So that's what I'm doing to repair the cowling, because I'm going to be installing new hinges. Before I get get started, I want to mention a couple of things with respect to preparation for doing the cowling installation. With respect to the hinges that will be going along the side of the cowling, you're going to be cutting yourself a smaller piece of the hinge that you order, probably from Aircraft Spruce. And this is an 1.5 inch piano hinge. And if you've noticed, I have the hinge actually is going to be reversed. This is how it fits together as a flat hinge, such as it being used on the top part of the cowling. But in the side hinges, we're going to reverse 1/2 of the hinge. And what this is going to enable us to do, once I get this thing reassembled, it's going to enable us to, when we attach this thing to the firewall, to the fuselage, inside the fuselage, the side that goes against the cowling will be offset just a slight bit. In other words, your cowling will extend just a little bit beyond the surface, so it won't chafe the side of your fuselage, in other words. So that's pretty important. So it's not very evident in the video, but you do reverse the hinge on the side hinges that are mounted on the side. And you'll mount the side hinge first before you begin the cowling installation. And you'll need to bend this piece before you go ahead and attach it to the fuselage. So when you bend it, keep in mind that there's going to be a surface that's going to be against the fuselage and then a surface that's against the cowling itself. And so with this in mind, also pay attention to where the handle is on your pin, because once you bend this, it's going to be very difficult if your handle is in the wrong place to flip it over, because that's going to flip the bend on your hinge. So in some ways this pin is going to be assisting you, or it might be a problem depending upon which side you have it on. So pay attention to which side. Remember, the pilot side and the passenger side, everything's going to be reversed, so you're going to have to reverse everything with respect to this. Just one last item. One of the motivations for going ahead and just starting the whole project over is because I realized that I had installed and I used an old hinge from an earlier airplane project that's not extruded. So in other words, not sure if you could see this, but there is the hinge part is not one solid piece. So it's possible that this hinge over time begin to wear out and the pieces pull apart. And so you want to get the newer extruded aluminum piano hinge to make sure you have the strongest possible. So just keep that in mind. If you're using an old piano hinge, you might not want to use it if it's not extruded. So I'm wanting to give you just an example with respect to placing this side hinge on. Notice I have the hinge reversed, and I'm going to place on the inside, on the right hand side of this hinge, this is going to go against my on the fuselage, and the side that's closest to me on the left is going to be where the cowling is going to be attached. And notice there'll be a slight overhang with this particular, with the cowling here, so you won't get this effect, this chafing here. As you can see, just so far I've already scratched much of the paint off of this part of the fuselage. So once again, this will be bent prior to being installed, and since I've already had some practice, I'm just going to catch these holes again and place this back here. Now this particular hinge is 14 inches, and as I watched the video I counted 13 inches, and I'm just going to go all the way to the bottom of the curvature and then up as far as I can, and this will go in place right there. So also, in addition, pay notice that there is a cutout here on either side, so that the cowling can go under here without trying to make a real sharp bend. So remove this material on both sides. Do that before you get started, so that that's not something you have to do because there's a final adjustment involved. Okay, just a few words about preparation, preparing the bottom half of the cowling, getting it ready for the initial fit. Once again, this is before any trimming of these sides here, so don't touch anything yet. So just drill one hole, and that's for your nose wheel. And so I'm using a 2 3/8 inch hole saw, and just measure up 3.5 inches from your center, and go ahead and drill that hole, and then cut that out with a diamond bit on your skill saw. And once again, leave the exhaust hole till later on. Here's that plumb line that I mentioned earlier, that I drew after the exhaust was removed and after this was on. But you do this at the end, and that'll be just fine. You may have to cut out the center portion here. In my two halves came with this cutout already, and so this particular hole or cutout and the top half are different. So at first I was a little bit concerned about that, but Jan has assured me that that's not a big issue, and so I'm proceeding with that advice. Okay, I've gone ahead, and as you can see, I've gone ahead and bent this. I've pre-bent this piano hinge that's going to go on the pilot side of the fuselage, and we're going to go ahead and attach that. And notice I've also drilled out a small A3 pilot hole for the to make it easier for when we get ready to install the cowling. We can make a couple of easy holes once we get this thing up here, and that's just a part of the process. So we're going to go ahead and get this riveted in place on both sides, and then we'll be just about ready to begin our first initial fit of the cowling. So in preparation for the cowling installation, in the video that you'll see on the Home Built Help, disc number 2 for the cowling installation, Jan just illustrates the installation of the cowling with the prop still installed, and he uses the back of the spinner plate to calculate the gap between the cowling and the spinner. And so it's obviously important to have this backplate on your motor, and the trick is to fasten it on here without needing to use the prop to really hold it in place. So that's what we need to figure out now. So once we get it on there, notice it doesn't stay on there very well. So what I've done is I've gotten some washers sufficient enough to put over what's needed there, and then go ahead and get the right size metric bolt and just bolt that in place, and with sufficient washers to clear the guides for the prop itself, we'll be in good shape. So that's taking care of that, and it's snug enough to serve as a guide for our cowling the gap. And there, that's in place. It's snug enough, just hand tight for all the preparations for the rest of the cowling. So that's just a bit of a help. You don't have to worry about banging into the prop or any of those issues. Okay, so I finished up my patchwork on my cowling, and I'm ready to begin to demonstrate how to begin to investigate the fit. Remember, this is prior to any trimming of the top part of the bottom cowl. The 1 inch that Jan mentions in the video, we're going to wait to determine if that's needed or not. And you've already done the drill out for the nose wheel. Once again, if you have the new type of the exhaust system, then I would recommend delaying drilling that out. So anyway, the first convenience that I've discovered was a way of being able to go ahead and position the cowl in its first initial attempt without using anything to lift it up. And so here's a couple of little clamps and some nylon string between the two. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook both of these onto the front of the cowl right behind the spinner so it hangs on top of the prop hub on one end, and then I'll go back and I'll on each side go ahead and clamp them to the fuselage for the beginning of the initial fit. I'll demonstrate that in just a minute. Alright, so I have the cowling, and I'm just going to go ahead and slide the nose, the cowling on top of the nose gear using the cutout that I've just made. And now I'm going to clamp each, I'm going to clamp one, lift this thing up, clamp the other side. I'll bring the camera around and show you just exactly what this looks like. Just let me demonstrate how this gets started. There, that's easily hanging there. Of course, it's not very secure. The next thing is to get a clamp. The clamps you're going to use to secure the cowling to the side. And so you begin by pulling up and making sure on the bottom to slide this all the way up as far as it can go, as far as you think you can take it. Then use your hip and your thigh and compress it, and there you've got it right there. Okay, I've got to adjust that clamp. It could be a little tighter. There we go. Okay, probably too tight. Now I'll do the same with the other side. Now let's see if it's going to be easier. Once again, lift it up. Put my hip and my thigh against the underneath, and then with my clamp, go ahead and pull it however I need to do it in order just to get it in position. And that's it. You are now ready to determine whether or not you have sufficient material on the cowling to warrant trimming it in the beginning. And we'll discuss some of the items that reflect on that. Once again, because mine's already been trimmed, I'm working with a deficit with respect to the height of this cowling. So my effort will be to level out both sides and to raise this end, the front end, up as high as it will go until it's all level. And then we'll have to see if the top cowling has sufficient extra material to make up the difference. And I've already pre-fitted it, so I know that's the case. So, all right, just a few comments before we actually get into the process of positioning the cowling in such a way as we can make a determination as to how much we're going to trim off this top edge on both sides. So if we take a level as a general reference, just to sort of see where the engine is with respect to a reference point of level. And so right now I set this little level and it's perfectly level here. And so what I'm wanting to do is I notice that my ball is way at this end, so that means this has to come up for my for it to be level. So I'm going to have to raise this end up, and I have room to raise that with. And we'll make sure that we get this up and clamped up here on the spinner so we can then lift the back up and force it up against the hinge and also get it closer to the radiator. So that's what our effort is, and to ultimately get this so that we're closer to level. And as I'm holding it up right now, and based upon the areas that I've already had to cut out due to the previous fitting that I've done, I'm pretty close to level as it is right now. So with respect to your work, not having cut anything out with respect to the obstructions of the gearbox or some of the places where the bolts tend to interfere with the cowling, you will determine whether or not the cowling is sufficient extra material before you start cutting on the cowl itself with respect to what might be in obstacles in the way. Okay, I'm wanting to give you a little glimpse as to how this little strap is going to be working for us. As you can see, we can just, as we are moving to raise the cowling up, I can also readjust the clamp so it becomes a tighter grasp here at the top on the prop hub. In addition, I've also made a mark. I don't know if it's really clear. There we go. This distance here I measured, it's a little bit more than an inch, about 1.25 inches, and on the same side, on the other side, there's also another mark. And both of those marks are helpful with respect to centering the cowling with respect to the spinner. So as I get this adjusted correctly, we want to make sure we have the cowling centered, and those marks are going to be helpful for allowing us to do that. So in order to determine whether or not you should actually do any trimming of the bottom cowl, as indicated in the installation video that Giannis produced, that 1 inch of extra material is, your effort is to not only try to get this edge level, and by raising it and by readjusting the cowl in order for this level to be achieved on both sides. Now, it's important to check both sides because, for instance, for me, I have noticed that I have a slight upward cut when I cut the cowl, and so I had to sand this extra down to make this edge flat. But now we're close to level on both sides, and in addition, we want to make sure that we're also equal distance with respect to the two marks in relationship to the back of the spinner, and also making sure that the gap that we have decided on is sufficient with respect to, it's not too close to the spinner and yet not too far away as to make sure that we're optimizing whatever is our need for cooling and the amount of air that's channeled directly into the radiator. One of the things that I think is really essential is how far up the cowling is going, because unless you can actually meet the bottom half of the cowling up halfway between the center of the prop hub and the edge of the cowling. In other words, if it doesn't rise to halfway up, then it's likely that you don't want to cut any material. And so I'll bring the camera around to illustrate what I mean by this. I'm also going to reposition the airplane in my garage because it's kind of cramped right now. And one of the important items to pay attention to is perspective. To have some distance to step back and to look at things from a distance is really, really important, especially when you're mounting the cowl. So here's a shot from the very front of the airplane looking directly at the spinner, or not the spinner, but actually the backplate for the spinner. And I've drawn a line that's level. It'd be nice if I rotated this level in the first place, but there's my line that's halfway up the center, and so that line is to help begin to serve as a reference. So when we're lifting this thing up, the idea is that we want to approach this line, these lines, evenly on both sides. And so, as you can see right now, I'm probably about an inch lower on that side. And so I'm checking the other side. It's probably about the same. And so right now, as it is, if I'm determining this is about the best I can get with respect to my initial setting, without now cutting out to avoid the gearbox and or the mounting bolts, will allow you to lift the cowl up more. But once again, remember, as you lift it up, then you're just going to have to check your gap towards the radiator down below. But anyway, if your bottom cowl is halfway or higher, then you once you get this all level and get this at that midpoint, then you can determine just how much you need to cut off as a part of your initial trimming of the bottom part of the cowl. Also, I forgot to mention that it's important to, before you drill for clecos, the hinges, go ahead and clamp whatever spacer you're going to be using to establish this distance from the back of the spinner to the front of the cowl. And recognize that if you have a gap that compresses the cowling, you'll need to readjust both sides to allow for the cowling to just shift slightly forward to take out whatever compression that you placed in by virtue of the clamp. So the reverse is true. If you put in a spacer that pushes your cowling this way, then you're going to want to go back and pull the whole thing back in that direction. So, okay, I've finished adjusting the bottom cowl, and it's in a position that I am comfortable with. I've got about a little over an inch and an eighth gap down by the radiator, and up here up front I've got just a little more than a ½ inch behind my back plate. And what's really great about this whole refit is that I was able to improve the issues that have complicated the problem for me. So because I cut off an inch here, I was worried about being too low. But as I measure now, I am just about a ½ inch below the center line, where before I was almost a whole inch or more. So I've already pre-trimmed part of the top cowl, but because now I'm going to have to actually do some more trimming, that'll play well for the next half of the project, getting the top half scoped out. So that's next. Okay, so now you can notice that I've removed the back plate for the spinner. That eases my access point. It gives me easier access point to what next is an important step in the process, and that is getting the front part of the cowling, the top part of the cowling, to line up, and so you can trim it correctly. So I've got, as Jan has mentioned in his video, we want to attach some clecos and tie down this point here on the front as well as the other side. And then we want to, this has already been pre-trimmed once before, and so I've got this roughed in and pretty close, pretty snug fit. I'm going to have to do a little bit more trimming up here at the top. It's not quite straight, and I see that that's a pretty good match all the way around this way. And as we get to this other side, you can see what I've done is I've taped this top piece down so it snugs inside the bottom cowling, and I've drawn that line, and I'm going to trim this so that takes up that excess off. So this edge lays down flat. And as you notice over here, here's the odd gap that I'm going to have to address when I get to doing the hinge. And so as we can see, we can address this gap. This will close up and pull tighter. It's just a matter of working it. So that's where we are right now. I'll go ahead and trim it, and then we'll talk about installing the hinges. Okay, this is the last thing. I'm wanting just to share that before I'm going to install the hinge here on the bottom half of the cowling. What I've done is I've purchased a 2-inch and a 1.5-inch 3-foot hinge from aircraft spruce, and I've split the hinges insofar as having a 1 inch and a 3/4 inch half for the piano hinge. As Jan mentions in his cowling instructions, that you have to be very careful when you are drilling out the rivet holes for the piano hinge, because it is going to be raised up just a bit, and you don't want to inadvertently come too close to the top. So the extra little bit of 1/4 inch here helps with that issue. So once again, just want a reminder, make sure you have some padding on top of your fuel pump. Make sure you get this top line trimmed before you settle on the final bottom cut of this edge here. So happy building!